there, I'm going to talk about Steve and a documentary film, which is a documentary film, and also Steve Martin Short, and even you will forget for the rest of your lives, which is a concert film. So Steve is obviously Steve Martin, even though I've bungled this whole introduction. And basically it's a 2-part documentary they made about him. It's now on Apple TV. I've always liked Steve Martin. I'm not like a mega fan of Steve Martin. I liked a lot of his stuff, and also saw some of his stuff wasn't as good. It's just that thing is like he does good stuff and does films that are maybe not quite as good. You know, no one understands him making Bilko or the Pink Panther. No one gets that one. So this just looks at his different career paths. First part is part 1, which is him as a young man to being a stand-up comedian, to being a massive star at stand-up and doing these big concerts, and how he stopped suddenly moving into movies. That's the first part. Then the second part goes into his life now, and looks back at the movies he did and decisions he made, and what his life was actually about, and the decision to stop making movies at a certain point as well. And it's just the idea of what a changing career can be and why decisions are made. So the first half's better, to be honest. The first half's more interesting because it is about someone struggling to figure out who they are. And like in this case, Steve Martin was a guy who liked comedy and he liked magic, and he liked some of the weird showmanship elements that were a bit out of fashion. And it was like he was out of step with the rest of the world at the time. The rest of the world was being cynical in Vietnam, hatred and all the rest of it. Just like the war's going on, you need to be political, and Steve Martin really wasn't. And it was the idea of him sort of struggling through this and trying to figure out what he wanted to be, because he knew what his material was, but he was still holding it down and getting it right and making mistakes with it and figuring it all out. But it was going completely against the rest of the world and what they were doing. And eventually the rest of the world clicked into what Steve Martin was doing in the late 70s, and suddenly became a megastar, like, fairly instantly. And then he was pretty much doing concert after concert after concert and been absolutely exhausted at a certain point. And then slowly it was him going to movies and using the sense of humour and weirdness to actually make films like that. So the first half is interesting because it shows you like getting and losing girlfriends, just doing the normal life things. What his relationship was with his father, which was difficult because his father didn't understand what he was about like, at all. And the sense of it was, he obviously had emotional issues because of there wasn't much emotion in his family, which carried down to him for a while, because one of the things that was legendary about Steve Martin was he wasn't a hugger, he wasn't overly emotional with you, he was fairly detached from people, he was hands off, kept a distance. He was that kind of person, and this film kind of explains why he was that kind of person, and how the act was his personality coming out. But in real life, he was a bit more hands off, and it's really wonderful. It's really fascinating because even though I explained all this stuff, it doesn't go into like simplification detail. It's like this led to this, and it was more complicated than just saying, "Oh, it was Dad's fault." It was a development of what he got as a child and what he didn't get as a child, and how he reacted to it, and how he reacted to the world, and how eventually that created this act. And how the act slowly became like a prison, because it was like all they had to go and do it, and people would go along with the act, and it wasn't sure it was even funny anymore. It was just a case of they love the act. It's like, as any new, or was it just like a dead end? So at his peak, he stopped doing the act. He just stopped touring. He didn't tour for like 30 years afterwards. He just didn't do it. I'll get to the touring thing later as well. Then the second half of the documentary is about him actually. He goes to see him when he's now older. He's in his 70s. He's working in something with Martin Short, who he became friends with in the 80s. And it goes back in time and shows you what he was doing in the 80s and how things developed. He was a workaholic in the 80s. A guy was hard to get close to because he'd a kind of work rate of churn films out like non-stop, like have a consistency of output, which worked well for a time because a lot of the films worked. And then when he hit the 90s, the films, when he started getting into dramas, because he'd done all these comedies, he started moving into dramas, that didn't work as well, and his career kind of lost a lot of centre really as he tried things that didn't quite work. And slowly after a time he got some consistency again with some of the Bowfinger and things, but there was also other films like Why'd You Do That, like Bilko and Pink Panther, stuff like that. I was like, what was I thinking here? So it kind of was a career that the person involved in it kind of started to lose interest at a certain point, it seems. Which you see that in a lot of careers. Like at a certain point, people they've had to challenge and had to prove themselves. At a certain point, they've made all the money they never need, and it gets a bit boring for them. And it's like it's a job, and they might not go that extra few mile to make something really good when they probably would have in the past. Or if they have a collaborator that doesn't work, they will just let it go rather than really working on it. It's that thing. So you get to see that and him looking back on it, and there's like, yes, some films worked, some films didn't. Some films worked at the time and then didn't later, and some films failed at the time and then became cult films like Three Amigos. So he's just looking back at his career, and it's kind of a mess. And he even admits it's kind of a mess. It's all over the place. But they also the part of the documentary is about him actually learning how to deal with people and getting married and becoming a bit more easier to deal with and warmer to people and figuring out how to deal with people and be nice to them. And there's just a sense of someone who's actually sort of come into their own later on in life and figured themselves out a lot more, and careers become less of an issue for them, which is probably another reason why some of the films maybe weren't as interested to other things in his mind. And he also goes into the idea that he started writing novels and writing plays as well that weren't conventionally funny, that he could express himself a bit more and do things that were less expected of him to try and get out of the bubble. Because always that feeling the documentary is he likes to perfect something, and once he's done it, he's kind of bored and he wants to go do something else. And once he's done that, he's bored and wants to do something else. He has a sense of someone who always likes a challenge, and certain things were less of a challenge than others. So it's an interesting documentary about life and all the complications of a life. You don't even have to be a big Steve Martin fan to enjoy it, because it is about the process of being a comedian and the downside of it, the upside of it, the frustrations of it, and what it takes, what kind of psychology it takes to be a comedian in the first place. So it's really worth seeing. Then I also watched, because during the documentary they're doing the show with the Martin Short and Steve Martin show, which again I'll read the title of. This is on Netflix, is An Evening You Will Forget for the Rest of Your Life. So it's up on Netflix, easy to find. This is an enjoyable show. It's done for the stage. They filmed it to show it on Netflix at a certain point. And this is before the Steve Martin Short did their Only Murders Left in the Building, which is something for Disney that actually is now in season 4, where they're actually doing these murder mysteries that Steve Martin wrote. It was just again, he switched gears to something else entirely at a certain point because he got bored and wanted to try something different. And obviously he keeps working with Martin Short because obviously they really get on, and you see that in the documentary, but also see that in the actual concert show where they're obviously enjoying themselves. They're putting effort into everything. They're trying to make it a good show so that people can enjoy the show. They're not like resting on laurels at all. It's like they do stuff together, and then at a certain point Martin Short does a bit where Steve Martin goes off and has a rest. Then Steve Martin comes on and does a banjo thing where Martin Short goes off and gets a costume change and a bit of a rest, and then they come back together and do their thing together again. And it's really enjoyable. Some of the jokes are corny, but they're intentionally corny. the chemistry between the two of them is a lot of fun because Steve Martin's always belittling Martin Short's career and everything else, and it's playful the way friends are playful with each other and enjoy being bitchy to each other. It's just a really enjoyable bit of silliness that really works. It builds and builds, and the show itself shows someone who's aware that you can't stay too long in one thing because people will get bored. So we do a bit of this, then before they get bored with that, we'll switch to something else, then we'll switch to something else. We'll always come back to what they like, but we'll vary it around a bit so you're getting everything, but you're also pacing it so people can keep the enjoyment up. And it's another one, it doesn't overstay its welcome. It seems to tend to filmed it, they're getting rid of all the flab and had what was the thing that worked on stage. As with a lot of concert films, I'm sure it's much more enjoyable to see on stage than it would be to see it on TV, but that's a limitation. But this and the documentary, I would highly recommend. I don't want to get into too much more detail. I don't want to start telling jokes from the comedy thing because I do it badly. And the documentary, there's a lot that you want to see yourself. But I would say give this a shot. It is worthwhile. So that's me for now. Bye.